Hello, everyone. I'm Roger Waldinger, professor of sociology at UCLA, director of the Center for the Study of International Migration, and I am delighted to welcome you to today's event. This event is co-sponsored with our friends and colleagues at the UC San Diego, the Center for Comparative Immigration Studies, and also with the UCLA Latin American Institute, the director of which, Ruben Hernandez-Leon, is here on the screen with us. So I will introduce today's speaker in a moment, but I want to let everyone know that we are temporarily stopping for the season, but we will begin again next quarter with an event on January 19th with the historian Tina Shull, who is going to present her book entitled Detention Empire, Reagan's War on Immigration and the Seeds of Resistance, and there'll be a comment by Ingrid Eagley, a professor of law here at UCLA. Okay, without further ado, I am delighted to present today's speakers, Julie Turkewitz, who is the Andes Bureau Chief for the New York Times, and Federico Rios, who is a photographer based in Colombia working for the New York Times. Together, they have produced some incredible stories about migration through the Darien Gap, and I am so delighted that they are here to tell us about their reporting and the situation that they've been covering so brilliantly. So Julie and Federico will each present separately. Julie will start, followed by Federico. They will continue for roughly 45 minutes, and then we will segue to Q&A. The best thing to do is to send me a message, but if I can see you on the screen and you raise your hand, I will be happy to recognize you and you can address yourself directly to the speaker. So, Julie, Federico, the floor is yours.
Thanks, and thank you all for being here on this Friday afternoon. I'm Julie. I'm the Andes Bureau Chief of the New York Times. I live in Bogotá, Colombia, and I cover not just migration, but 5 countries in South America. And I think what we're going to do today is just talk a little bit about the work, show some images, and then I know that both of us are really interested to hear comments and questions. This is work that we plan to continue with, and so I'm really curious to hear from folks outside of Colombia and even outside the US, sort of what you're interested in knowing about this phenomenon that we've been covering. So I wanted to start by saying that, both Fede and I have been documenting this sort of exodus from Venezuela for a couple of years now. I'm sure that so many of you know that more than 7 million people have left Venezuela in the last 10 years or so. And so these are just 3 stories, just 3 examples of the way that we were sort of covering Venezuelan migration, but really pre-2020, pre-2021. And the way that this sort of reporting came, this Darien reporting came about for us was that 2021, we started hearing that there was a very large number of Haitian migrants who had sort of arrived in northern Colombia and were hoping to cross this dangerous jungle called the Darien Gap. And I had a very limited knowledge of what the Darien Gap was at the time. I think Fede, living in Colombia, had a little bit more knowledge. But we decided that we had to go document it. And so we went and we did a sort of, kind of typical week-long reporting trip where we wrote about this phenomenon, this very large number of people trying to use what until that point had been considered almost like a wall between 2 continents, South America and North America. And we saw that year that 130,000 people crossed this very dangerous jungle that does connect the 2 continents. And so we thought, okay, that's that. And then the next year, right around the same time, we heard that an even larger number of people had sort of gathered at the entrance to this jungle and were starting to go through. And this time they were Venezuelans. And so again, we thought we would do one more story. This is the Haitian story. And we got to this town called Necoclí, which is the border, which is sort of at the northern tip of Colombia. And the number of people who were there, I think, made us really realize that this was a generation-defining story we were looking at, and that this wasn't something that was going to go away. This was something that was just going to get much, much bigger. And there were a number of things that we saw. One of them was really that there was this entire business and industry that was growing around getting people through the jungle, and also that the Colombian government was pretty much absent and allowing this business to sort of happen out in the open. And so we got into the jungle, we started hiking, we thought we got permission from our editors. Okay, you can go 1 to 3 days into the jungle, and then come back and file your story. So we did that. Logistically, I can describe later how we got back, but essentially we filed a story after about 3 to 4 days of hiking. And we said to our editors, the story is too big, we have to go back. So we basically went back to the midpoint that we had stopped at and finished the trek. And that was a total of 9 days. And I think that we just realized that this was going to be a very big story, and that we, for various reasons, had really a front seat to this moment in history, and that it was really our duty, our journalistic duty, to cover it in a way that that people in the US could relate to, right? And that people felt that they had to read, that it wasn't just another migration story, but that they had to read it. And I think that for me, I'm from the US. I've seen the way that migration is so often covered. And while there are many reporters doing amazing work on this topic, so much of the focus often ends up being on the border. And then it is sort of reduced to this question of what should we do about the border? What should we do about the border? And reporting from further south, I think, really allowed us to step back and tell people's stories and talk about why people were leaving their countries, and just tell a bigger, much more international story. And so after we wrote the first story sort of about this very large number of people from Venezuela who were risking really everything to make this journey, which I'll put right here. We were looking for other ways to talk about what was happening in the jungle. And we knew that we had heard from NGOs that one of the problems was family separations, that things are so chaotic on the route that parents sometimes get separated from children. And that was one of the things that as we went back into the jungle for the second half of that journey, we thought that we might be able to talk about, but we really weren't sure. And lo and behold, we came across a little girl who had been separated from her mother. And that story became kind of the next story for us. And I think really helped us kind of take this really big phenomenon. You can see this image here from Fede, which is just kind of gets at both the individual storylines, but also the bigness of the phenomenon. And this story that we did about Sarah and Alexandra, this is the mother and daughter who were separated, I think really helped boil it down to what that experience is like for one family. And I think that one of the things that was most special for us about that story was how much reader reaction we received. I mean, it was just like dozens of emails, tons and tons of people who were just commenting or wanted to reach out and help them. And what that really said to us, and I think what it really said to our editors also, is that people were connecting with this story. And I think that some of the most special emails I got were from people who said like, hey, this isn't normally the kind of story I relate to, but this really touched me and this really affected me. And it really said that I think we were sort of breaking down some of our very sort of stagnated political conversation about migration. I wouldn't say we totally broke it down. I think that would be a little bit above my pay grade, but at least we were having people respond in that way. So one of the things that happened on this first journey is that while most of the people we were meeting were from Venezuela, there were also some people from Haiti, a couple from Cuba. We were really just shocked to see people from China and Afghanistan. And Federico had this experience where there was this family in the jungle, and there was this older woman with a headscarf, and he took a picture of her and he said, excuse me, where are you from? And the family said, we've come from Afghanistan. And then they later actually asked him not to publish that photograph. So that photograph has not been published, but that really told us that this is not just a Venezuela story. This is not just a South America, it's not just sort of Latin American, Caribbean story. This is a new path that people from all around the world are using. And so we went back in February and March of this year, and we did the trek again. And this time we did it with a group from Afghanistan. And it was sort of both a story about this internationalization of this route, but also a story about the way that the US has not created enough pathways for people coming from the countries that it once worked with. And so that story was quite involved, and we ended up starting in Brazil, where many Afghans first arrived in South America, and then trekking all the way up. And we even actually ended that reporting sort of saga in Mexico, watching Afghan families, throw ladders over the wall and arrive in the United States. And we're still in touch with a lot of these families, but particularly some of the Afghan families. So from there, it just became very clear that what we really need to do is step back a little bit and look at what are the factors that are facilitating this. And I think both of us really had seen how we'd seen the business around this. I mean, we'd been intimately sort of involved with every single day going, when we're in the reporting field, so we are watching the people who are doing the business, right, around migration, and they had become our sources and our contacts. And we decided that it was really time that we sort of turned the lens toward them and looked at the way that these sort of communities at the entrance to the Gap are monetizing this route. And that, I think, was a really, really challenging and delicate story for us to write, because it's not a sort of simple story of a couple of smugglers taking advantage of poor people who have no other options. It's a much more complex story, which I'm sure that many of you, if you look at migration issues, know that, so some of the folks who are making money off of this migration route are really just everyday people who are acting as guides through the jungle. And so what this next article that we wrote sort of looked at the way that these communities have monetized this route. And of course, the people who are in charge of this business at the edge of the route are local leaders, local politicians, and it just looks at the complexity around that. And it also looks at the major challenge that the Colombian government and the US government have, in that the entrance to the Darien Gap, and at least the first half of the Darien Gap, is controlled by, Colombia's biggest narco-trafficking group, which is the Clan del Golfo, or the Autodefensas Gaitanistas de Colombia. And that organization is essentially the government in the very place where these migrants are beginning their journey. So that article came out in September, and really, I think it's probably the article that has had the most sort of institutional response from the US government and from others. And then the very last piece that we've done, or at least the latest installment, is this piece. And in this piece, we went back to Sarah and Alexandra, the mother and daughter who had been separated for some time in the jungle and then eventually reunited. And what this piece looks at is, as I'm sure so many of you know, the Biden administration has really tried to avoid having so many people at the border, and has had to try and sort of avoid having this humanitarian crisis in the Darien Gap by offering new or expanded legal pathways for people to come to the United States. One of the best known ones is this parole program for Venezuelans, for Cubans, Haitians, and Nicaraguans. And this latest piece that we did really just looks at the limits of that program. Sarah and Alexandra, the mother and daughter that we followed, they after they survived the Darien Gap together, they stopped. They didn't go to the border. They followed Biden's instructions and they applied for the parole program. And I believe they put in their application November 16th, 2022. And now it's December 8th, 2023, and they're waiting in an extremely precarious situation. And they've heard nothing. They just don't know, like, is there something wrong with their application? Is it going to be approved in 1 hour? Like, they just have no idea. And so that is sort of what we've done on this, the really huge expansion of the Darien Gap as a route toward the United States. When we, last year, 250,000 people crossed the Darien Gap. This year, I believe that like 2 days ago, we passed somewhere around there, we passed 500,000 people crossing the Darien Gap. 300,000 or maybe a little bit more, actually, somewhere between 300 and 400,000 of them are from Venezuela. The second largest group in the jungle is now from Ecuador. That is a very new number. Again, many of you probably know that of many of the safety issues that are happening in Ecuador right now. And so we're really planning to continue this reporting. One of the biggest things that I'm really interested in, I'd be really curious if any of you are studying this, is looking at the way that social media is transforming migration. We're seeing this just explosion of Darien content online, both from migrants themselves who are telling their own stories and sharing information, as well as from guides, smuggler types, whatever you want to call them. And yeah, so we're happy to answer any questions. There's all kinds of sort of like ethical challenges and in doing this work, but we can get into that a little bit later. Thanks.
One second. Thank you so much, Julie. So, Federico, do you want to begin? Federico?
There's a question from Zoe.
So we start with questions, or wasn't I think Federico is going to make a presentation, no?
Yeah, I think we can do some questions now that the observation is fresh, and then we go to show the pictures, and then at the end we have like a longer space for questions. Julie?
Okay. So, where is it? One second, I'm having some problem. Where's the Q&A? Okay, hold on. No. Zoe, can do you want to ask your question directly?
Yeah, I'd love to. So hi guys, thank you so much for this work. I work for IOM's Missing Migrants Project, where we track the deaths and disappearances of migrants all over the world. Darien Gap is an incredibly difficult place for us to gather information from. And I know that we discussed your series of articles pretty extensively within our team. We are like super appreciative of you for doing this work. And I'm curious if you might be able to point us in the direction of anyone who is collecting information about the people who are dying on this route.
Yeah, it's such a good question. I literally just spoke to some of your colleagues maybe like 10 days ago. And I'm sure you know the folks at ICRC are doing work on this too, sort of as mediators. And this is one of the stories that we have really pending, is that we, as you're saying, we really want to show the humanitarian toll of this. And while we've gotten at that in certain ways, I don't feel that we've fully captured it. And that one of the ways to do that is to look at the number of people who are dying and who are going missing on this journey. And I also think, frankly, it's like a public service announcement for folks who are thinking about taking this journey, because it's just so many people don't realize. I mean, they see pictures on social media, but it's not the same as getting a real full full report. So I unfortunately don't have, you guys are the best. And the only thing I'll say is that I'm really interested in also the way that social media is used to talk about the dead and missing, because there's a ton of information on, you know, in the Facebook groups, in the WhatsApp groups, on TikTok, where people are being reported dead and missing. It's just like, how do you vet all of the, how do you gather all of those cases, then vet all those cases and follow up, et cetera, et cetera. We haven't done that work.
Okay, David Fitzgerald.
Yes, I have a couple of questions. The first is if you can say something more about any evidence of the Panamanian government coming under US pressure to stop people in Darien. And the second has to do with the structure of the smuggling industry. To what extent did you find people who had a whole package deal from the country of origin to the US, or on a more pay and little segments as you go kind of strategy?
Yeah. So I will admit that I'm not 100% up on what is happening between the US government and the Panamanians. I know some of my colleagues who cover like DHS and or just, you know, US Washington basically are slightly more up on that, but I do know, I believe CBS reported, right, that the US is looking at, or is Panama already doing deportations? I'm sorry, I'm not 100% up on exactly what is happening in Panama, but what we're definitely seeing is, like, you know, all these people are arriving in Panama. Panama is this tiny little country, and its strategy up until now, which I'm sure many of you know, has been to bus people, just, you know, take them from the UN camp or the UN, where the camp where the UN is present at the end of the jungle, and take them as quickly as possible into Costa Rica. I do know that there has been US pressure on Panama to do more in terms of like deterrence kind of stuff, but I don't have the details on that. And then
just to add something, it's really complex to keep the step with the migration policies of every country, and Panama is changing migration policies really quick. They have changed it like 2 or 3 times in the last 2 years. They are deporting Colombians back to Colombia. They are busing people from the south border to the north border with Costa Rica, most of the migrants. There's a big majority of migrants arriving into Panama into what they call migrant reception centers, and they have 2 migrant reception centers, Lajas Blancas and San Vicente, and there are migration authorities, Panamanian authorities, NGOs, and other groups in those places, but they don't allow people to go out freely from there and walk into Panama. They bus them out to the northern border. There was also an incident in the past year where a lot of migrants died because one of those buses go out of the road and roll into a cliff. So they have been like shifting and changing their migration policies quite often. So it's complex it's not easy to keep like a accurate track of it. So we basically what Julie needs to do, and what our team is doing, is for every article we're writing, we're changing, like we're researching and updating their policies.
To answer the question about the people with sort of full packages versus sort of paying in what I would call like the baton style, where they, you know, pay like for leg of the route and then pay for leg of the route, I would say that at least my familiarity is much more with, you know, what is happening with the Venezuelans and the Afghans, which is much more of that sort of baton style where people show up, pay a leg of the route, then, you know, they get to the end of that route and then they pay for another part. So there's parts where they use sort of smuggler types and parts where they don't. That would be Venezuelans and Afghans. I suspect that the Indians and the Chinese are doing more of a sort of full package kind of deal, but I've based on sort of a little bit of what we've heard, but I'm honestly not an expert on that. But it is clear that there's a mix of both, but that generally the Venezuelans, who of course are like the biggest group, are sort of with doing a pay as you go. And sometimes it's an all-inclusive package for a certain part of the journey, right? So you'll pay $350 to get you from A to B, and that will include various things. But it really seemed the sort of prevailing model seems to be that sort of pay as you go kind of model.
Okay, Laura Vargas.
Hi, this is wonderful work and wonderful reporting. Thank you for sharing it, and congratulations. I'm Laura Vargas. I'm an assistant professor at CU Anschutz at the School of Medicine in Denver. And I'm doing research with immigrants who have just crossed into the US. So Latin American immigrants who have just arrived into the US. And yeah, I hear a lot about the Darien. I've been collecting data for about 1.5 years, 2 years by now. And so I started with the Haitians, then the Venezuelans, the Colombians, etc. So it's evolved quite a bit. And I'm just wondering, and to your point about social media, there's just so much information that folks share on social media so quickly. It's astonishing. I'll just anecdotally share, there was one incident where somebody ran over a lot of migrants outside of Brownsville. I was collecting data in McAllen. This person took their truck, ran over a bunch of migrants outside of the shelter in Brownsville, killed a lot of them. I heard about it in the news maybe like 4 hours later. I heard about it 20 minutes after it happened with pictures on WhatsApp. I was collecting data at the border. So it's just astonishing how fast the communication goes. And I'm wondering if you're reporting, or you're doing some reporting or considering some reporting about the money flows precisely that do happen online, do happen through social media. And I mean, there must be like almost influencers that are getting paid for this too. So in terms of because it's just an astonishing amount of money. I talk to people not just about payments, but I also ask them about extortion. And extortion, I'm asking specifically about extortion, not about how much did you pay the coyote, the smuggler, the whatever. So the money flows are just incredible. And I'm wondering if in your reporting, you're getting to some of that, that chain of money and how all this money is being moved around.
Yeah.
Seems like that would matter.
Well, the first thing I'll say is stay tuned for the next article in the New York Times,
Okay.
which is going to really touch on some of these topics that we've been really looking at really closely, and looking at the connection between like money and social media and migration. I do think there's going to be more to be done though, even after this article comes out, because as you said, it's just an astonishing amount of money. And so, we did this article that looked at the amount of money that's being spent just in Northern Colombia by migrants. And I mean, then we're talking about tens of millions of dollars. I can't even remember. We just did like mind-boggling calculations, especially for that kind of region. But that's just one tiny little part of this, right? And Federico and I were talking the other day about loans like that people take out for migration, and kind of like so there's I think it's so important to look at the money, because it's like, how does this circle go round, right? So yes.
Okay, Federico, do you want to present?
Yeah, I'll present it. I'm going to recap some of what Julie says. And this is okay. Now you're seeing the picture of the people and the houses in the river.
Correct.
So this was back in 2021. We have done some report about migration from Venezuelans coming to Colombia, going back to Venezuela, going to Brazil, moving around, trying to stay in Bogotá. When COVID hits, Venezuelan population was one of the first to feel the economy collapse because they start losing their jobs. And some of them start walking back from Bogotá to Venezuela. That's like weeks walking in the roads. But in 2021, after Jovenel Moïse, the president of Haiti, was killed, lots of Haitians, thousands of them, start trying to cross the Darien Gap. Haiti is half of an island in the Caribbean, but migration from Haitians has been happening for decades. They came first to Latin America. Some of them went to Brazil. Some of them went to Chile. Those were kind of the preferred destinations for them. And I don't know if this was just a coincidence, an accident, or a detonator, but when President Moïse were killed, thousands of them start going from Brazil and Chile to the north of South America, reach Colombia, and try to cross the Darien Gap. We have seen the evolution of these places, and it's incredible to see how the business of migration has been evolving to adapt, trying to provide a service and, of course, charge some money. This picture I'm showing you here, I want you to remember this picture is a place called Las Tecas. We went there in 2021 and started documenting Haitians while they were crossing the Darien Gap. And that year, at the end, it was about 120,000 migrants crossing the jungle. And that was very precarious. Father and daughter, people with cell phones, no information. One common situation we have seen in the migrants crossing the Darien Gap is that no matter how the internet flows, no matter how the information goes in social media here and there, most of the people who goes to Necoclí, which is like the starting point to cross the jungle, they don't have information of how long it's going to take them, what do they need to bring, what should they left. Like, they don't have practical information. They start walking the jungle and asking themselves and the people around them every minute, how long is this going to last? Are we going to arrive today? Are we going to arrive tomorrow? They just don't know. This Haitian woman passed out for some minutes. She was exhausted. The Darien Gap is a stretch of jungle about 100 kilometers, and there is no road. There is no nothing. There were only paths, and those paths are becoming wider and bigger as more people is crossing the jungle. It was one of the characters we follow, a woman with a baby, a daughter, and her husband. And this is in the other side. This is the Panamanian side, where this officer from Senafront, which is the Panamanian border police, were like at the exit point of the jungle, trying to organize migrants, put them into canoes, and then sail them into small indigenous towns to register them and allow them to keep going north. These are the registration places, and there were many people traveling without any kind of document. This is Necoclí, 2022. The shift was very dramatic. It changes from 120,000 migrants a year in 2021 to 250,000 migrants a year in 2022. So the increasing was more than twice the amount of migrants, but also the number of Haitians traveling the jungle start going down, and the number of Venezuelans crossing the jungle start climbing up. Some of them slept in the beach. And you can see the difference between the photos of 2021, which was just like small trails in the jungle, to these that looks almost like an ave, you know? It's like very wide, and the people crossing there every day, thousands of people crossing that path every single day, is making this impact in the area. These were a group of migrants during the first day of walking, trying to find where to go. This is Luis Miguel Arias, one of the migrants we followed really closely, one of the characters we followed close. And she was Melissa. She was 4 years old when I took this picture. He was her father, he was exhausted when I shot this. The little girl, she was like also collapsing, you know, like she didn't understood what was happening. After a very long journey, several months, because it's not just the Darien Gap. They crossed the Darien Gap and they had to cross again all Central America. They made it to Guatemala. They had to wait a long time in Guatemala trying to collect the money to make it to Mexico. Once they made it to Mexico, it was a long journey to make it to the border, and they crossed the border. Now they live in the States. There are 4 of them, like Luis Miguel and his wife, Melissa, and her brother. Melissa is 5 now. She's going to school. The father and the mother had jobs, and recently they bought a car, the first car of their life. And this is how diverse is the jungle. It's like it's people from everywhere. Until now, we have 97 nationalities crossing the Darien Gap. There's people from all South America, and that's very easy to understand. But there's also a lot of people from Africa coming to Latin America and crossing the Darien Gap. A lot of people from Middle East, a lot of Afghans, also people from India, people from Bangladesh, and people from China. The guy in the center of the photo, with red shorts and blue sweater, his name is Gabriel Infante. He was a trombone player in an orchestra in Venezuela, and he was traveling all the jungle with his instrument tied to his back. Also, he's holding a young girl's hand, and I remember this guy was like helping that girl, but it was not her daughter, but the friend's daughter who was behind him, and he was singing child songs to keep the spirit of the girl, because she was crying, exhausted, bitten by mosquitoes, sweating, all wet and dirty because of the mud and the humidity of the jungle. So he was trying to cheer her up. This woman was also one of the characters who we were following. And on this hill she felt. And the sound we heard when she fell down was horrible, because it sounded like when you broke a branch, it sounded like a broken bone. I shot some photos and I run, and there was more people around. They all run to see how was she. And lucky she didn't have broken bones, but the sound was horrible. She kept walking. She was pregnant. The next day, she told us she was bleeding and she thought she had lost the baby because of this fall. This is Rappi. I'm sure you are like used to see delivery guys around in Latin America and everywhere else in the world. And this is a Venezuelan migrant. Maybe he was working for Rappi because they had to pay for the backpacks and for all the things they own from the company. And he was just traveling with the Rappi backpack, crossing the jungle. And this was Jordi Chino kissing a 2-month-old baby in a creek. We have seen old people crossing the jungle, and we have seen people with babies crossing the jungle. It's like there is not a standard for something like that. This is a dead body. The smell, it was really horrible to see something like that. And like as one of you asked a few minutes ago, like it's complex to understand how many people is dying on the jungle. And one of the challenges for that is that Venezuelan authorities, no, sorry, Panamanian authorities are counting the people coming inside the country. But Colombian authorities are not counting the people going out from the country. So if you don't have like a list to compare, the number of people to compare, it's impossible to understand how many people is dying. So we are talking about 500,000 people crossing the jungle in 2023. But that's the official number Panamanian authorities are giving us. And we know there is a sub-registration for that, because there's people who doesn't go to these migrant reception center. This is Gabriel Infante again. He was playing the Venezuelan anthem in the mornings to cheer up people. And people were happy. It's really complex, but there's a lot of solidarity, and there are like glimpses of happiness amidst all the sadness, pain, and desperation you see in the jungle. People try to help each other. This is one of the indigenous towns in the middle of the journey. So once you leave Colombia and start walking inside the jungle, and before exiting into Panama, there are some indigenous towns in the trail. In this one specifically, the migrants were held inside this fence. The migrants were held inside this fence. They had to camp there for one night, and next day they had to pay to exit the place. So if you didn't have the money to pay, you had to give something, like cell phone, a watch, a pair of earrings, a gold bracelet, whatever, but it was not like possible to go out from this place without paying for migrants. This woman was really sick. She was on the floor coughing. She had fever, vomiting. I think it was highly possible that she has drink contaminated water, because as people is walking the same creek, they are drinking water from that creek, and of course is not good water for drinking. But also she can be bitten by a mosquito and get malaria or any other vectorial disease, or there's a couple of things that could get her so sick as this. And there's nothing to do. There's no treatment. There's nobody to go to. There's nobody. One important thing to understand about Darien Gap is that there's nobody in the middle of the way. This is one guide. In the beginning of the journey, there are some people like guides and backpack carriers trying to help migrants and get paid for doing something like that. And this guy were getting paid for carrying this baby to the top of the mountain. That was a few hours. So he climbed up the mountain with the baby, and he was desperate on top of the mountain because the fathers of the baby were not showing up. So he was confused, and he was worried that the fathers of the baby had left the baby behind. After a long time, maybe more than 1 hour, the parents showed up and recovered the baby. This is Joseph and his brother. Joseph lost his left leg in a motorcycle accident in Venezuela. Am I Julie, can you yes? Yeah, because there was this other guy who also lost the leg.
Correct.
Okay, yeah, Joseph
Yeah,
lost
you're correct. They
leg.
both lost. We came across multiple people who had lost limbs. Both Joseph and the other man had lost their leg in a motorcycle accident, and his brother's name was Wilson, I believe.
Yeah. So the brother was carrying the backpack with the belongings of the two of them, and he was walking with that in the mud, crossing the Darien Gap.
I just want to add a tiny little thing to that picture, that what Joseph did so that his crutches would not sink into the mud was that he put tuna cans. I don't know how he affixed the tuna cans, but he fixed tuna cans to the bottom of his crutches so that they wouldn't sink as much into the mud.
And this became a very important photo because they are Angel and Sara. It became a very important photo for our project. I mean, not like a we were walking and documenting the journey of all these people, and suddenly I saw this young girl and this strong man taking care of her, and we find out that he was not his father or his relative at any point. He was just trying to take care of that little girl, because the mother, who was supposedly behind them, asked him to take care because she had blisters and her foots were hurting. Just she was not able to walk as fast as most of the people. So she asked them, can you help me with the girl? So he was helping the girl and taking care of her. That night, we put our hammocks next to his tent and start documenting Sarah's story. The little girl was desperate. She was 7, and she was crying and asking for her mother. And we were also trying to understand what was happening, because there was nobody like coming to claim she's my girl. At the end, we document how this little girl and her mother, Alexandra, were separated one from the other during several days in the jungle. The guy, Angel, took care of her until the end, and they meet up again at the exit of the jungle, where the mother and the daughter got reunited. These 3 girls and the woman are the Hamlets, the daughters of Hamlet Ortega. They were Venezuelans. The mother died of breast cancer because there was no treatment in Venezuela for that. They moved to Peru. The father tried to work there, and the daughters convinced the father to cross the jungle and go to the States. This was the oldest one, and she had like a very bad situation in a toenail. So the woman who was coming with them from Peru, she was trying to help her. And this is the father, exhausted, devastated, because the few food he has, he was giving all the food to his daughters, and he was not eating anything at all. So he has no energy in his body, because this photo was like maybe 6 or 7 days after walking in the jungle, and the man was not eating anything at all. It was rain, of course. It rains, the rivers, the mud. If it's not raining, the sun is burning. And then at the end of the journey, like the last 3 or 4 days, the rivers are really, really big. So crossing the rivers is a danger, because it's really hard to tell when the river is growing suddenly. So if it's rain on top of the mountain, you don't even see that, and suddenly it's like an avalanche and the river grows. So this is how people need to cross the river from one side to the other, trying to protect themselves. These people were arriving at the first indigenous town. It was a small camp called El Abuelo. It was an indigenous town of, I don't know, no more than 10 houses, just a few people. But that was the first like civilized place they saw after several days in the jungle. And this is, Julie, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is San Vicente, yes?
Yeah, correct. Mm-hmm.
This is San Vicente Migrant Reception Center, where the migrants find Panamanian authorities and some NGOs like Doctors Without Borders, UNICEF, United Nations, like several NGOs are working from there.
And I should add one thing, that if any of you are talking to migrants. That's the place that people will call like La ONU, like the UN, because that's the camp. It's technically it's a Panamanian government camp, but the UN operates inside, and so it's sort of colloquially referred to as the UN camp.
So in this place there are showers, a place to charge the cell phones, and all migrants are mostly desperate because they haven't heard from their families in several years, in several days while crossing the jungle, and their families haven't heard about them. Just as Julie said, we were crossing the Darien Gap, and we found that there was also Afghans traveling the Darien Gap, and that caught our attention. So we start trying to identify the situation, and we track it back to Brazil. And we understand that Brazil was giving the Afghans humanitarian visas. So the Afghans were allowed to exit Afghanistan, travel to Iran or Turkey or Qatar, and flying from there to Brazil. So they landed in the airport in Sao Paulo. The name of the airport is Guarulhos, and they basically camped in the second floor of the Guarulhos airport for several days, sometimes weeks or even months, while collecting enough money to keep traveling north. But if you look on a map, the journey from Brazil to Colombia, just that part, is 1,000 kilometers. So they start the journey from there. They cross all the Amazon jungle, sometimes by plane, sometimes by bus, ended up in the border between Brazil, Bolivia, and Peru, cross all Peru by bus, then Ecuador, then enter Colombia in the south, and cross all the country south to north. They go to Necoclí and then cross the Darien Gap. So this is Afghan women camping, living, sheltering, I don't know what word to use, at the airport. And there was some social programs in Brazil trying to keep the Afghans there, trying to help them with the language, with trying to find them jobs, and trying to put the kids into schools. The situation is really complex because first, Portuguese is not a language Afghans are used to. And second, in most of Latin America, the minimum wage is just too low for anybody. So their goal is to make it to the States. So most of them just keep going. But the Afghans present for us a different challenge. A challenge that for me as a photographer was specifically complex to solve. And thanks God, Julie was there to help me. The problem was that some Afghans told us if the Taliban saw a picture of their face back there in Afghanistan, they will go behind their families and kill them because they were traitors fleeing the country. So I had to photograph Afghan people flying Afghanistan, migrating through South America, but without the faces. And that's where Julie came up with these kind of beautiful ideas to have some portraits of them that wouldn't cross the ethic borders of putting people in danger just because of a photo. It was pretty challenging also because, well, you have now heard my broken English, but with the Afghans, it was much more complex because many of them didn't speak any English at all. Some of them speak Dari and Pashto, and just a few of them were able to communicate with Julie and me in English. We start doing things like that to show how was their daily life in Brazil while waiting to decide if they were traveling north or not, and at the same time trying to protect their faces. This woman belongs to an ethnic minority in Afghanistan who's been like followed and basically exterminated by the Taliban. And then while we were following the Afghans into the Darien Gap, we also found the Chinese. And we start understanding how this was about people from all around the world. this guy standing in front of the camera wearing that suit, it's like, that wouldn't be our choice to cross a jungle for several days. But that was a gift given to him. So he was very proud of that suit. He was coming from China. He was also belonging to a religious minority. He was feeling a lot of weight on his shoulders. And then he, as many of his Chinese friends, fled the country. The Chinese use different routes. They somehow managed to get a flight to go to Ecuador. And from Ecuador, they had to cross Ecuador and Colombia by bus, made it to the border and made it to the Darien Gap. This is the people in line in the north of Colombia before taking the boat to cross the Gulf to start walking in the Darien Gap. And here you can see how the local people was like pushing their own boundaries and trying to prepare for migration. This is at the port who sell the boat tickets to cross the Gulf. Every migrant has to cross the Gulf before entering the Darien Gap. And well, this is in Spanish, English, and I don't know if that's Mandarin or Cantonese. But there was also these kind of scripts in Haitian, Hindi, and many other languages. This was a Haitian migrant, but photographed in 2023. The number of Haitians crossing the jungle now has been decreasing, but is not stopping or disappearing. And these were the Chinese boarding the boats across the jungle. We start walking and we cross the jungle with the Afghans. This was Sharif, a police officer from Afghanistan who fled the country with his wife and his little baby. And this, I can't, sorry, Julie, I don't remember the name.
This is, believe it's Mohammed Rahim. There were two,
Yeah, Mohammed Rahim, you're right.
two brothers who was two Mohammeds who were brothers who were traveling together as part of a family of 17 people who had come from Afghanistan.
And this guy had several like complex medical condition. He has like high pressure, diabetes, and many other stuff that was making even harder for somebody to cross the jungle. But also he was 70 something.
One brother was 60 and one brother was 69 or 70.
So he had to stop pretty often. And his family was hydrating him and giving him massages and like sugar biscuits and things like that to keep him up. But it was really complex. This is Sharif again with his wife and his baby. And when we were crossing the jungle with the Afghans, some of them were open to photograph to allow us to photograph their faces. Not all of them, I have to say. And we took to that, Julie and me, because we thought it was very important also to the world to understand what was happening inside the Darien Gap, but for us to respect the people's will. So if they didn't want it to be photographed, we don't photograph them. If they didn't want us to use their last name or the first name, we didn't interview them or we didn't use the name, even when it's really complex for a journalistic mission to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'll just add that, especially just considering what you said before, especially, with all of these stories, we've had major ethical considerations about how to protect some of the people that we are writing about, because obviously when people are fleeing their country, they're often fleeing things that they can't put in the newspaper, especially not on the front page of the New York Times. And so, without sort of getting into all the details, particularly with the Afghan families, it was like months-long conversations with many of them about how we would portray, like what we would reveal exactly, as well as conversations with, say, our colleagues who work in Afghanistan about what kinds of dangers existed if we published faces or names and things like that. And I'll just say, logistically speaking, what we did in this case was we showed up in Necoclí, met this very large group of Afghans, 54 people, and essentially our introduction was, hello, we're the reporters from the New York Times. We're going to be going with you on your journey. Anybody who doesn't want to talk to us is no problem at all. We will not be photographing your faces, and we will not be publishing your last names. And that was like the starting point, because we knew, especially, there's all sorts of cultural and safety things that were going on there, and that we really needed to build trust. And so Faye essentially photographed this entire journey as if he wouldn't be able to publish people's faces. He had a version of photos with faces and a version without. And then only after building the relationship, after several weeks, could we have these conversations with people and talk to them about what they were comfortable with. And we ultimately only published the faces of some people who agreed to it, and only published first names of pretty much everyone who came from Afghanistan. And then specifically in the case of this family, which we really focused very closely on, they allowed us to publish their first names, Taiba and Ali, but they asked us not to publish their son's name because they, he's a child and this could follow him around. And anyway, it's a much longer consideration thing that we could talk about forever, but I think it's important to highlight.
So in this case, for example, the guy is Ali, and the wife in a purple shirt behind them is Taiba, and the guy in blue is Julie.
Jalil. Yeah, the cousin.
The cousin.
Mm-hmm.
And they, for example, they didn't want us to use the name of their kid, the name of the baby. So we were able to use Ali and Taiba's name, but not the baby's name. Or we were able to use the baby's age. And I think it was very challenging, but at the same time, it was a very important lesson of journalism for me, and for Julie too, I guess, to understand the cultural barrier between between how we see the world and how the Afghans see the world. It's like, because I was there and I was not trying to tell them what to do and what not to do, or things like that. But it was really, really complex. These were Chinese people cooking their food in the migrant camps at night. And this is a 13-year-old Chinese woman in the floor, and his father is in the back. She was really sick, vomiting and feeling really bad.
I should add one more thing, is just that, we knew that really wanted to be able to also tell the stories of the Chinese families that we saw in the jungle, and we knew that also language was going to be a huge barrier. And when we had access to the internet, we could actually do a lot with translating services and have sort of basic conversations about where people came from and why they were leaving. But once we were in the jungle, that wasn't possible. And so what we did, because very, very, very few of the Chinese migrants we met spoke any English at all, much fewer than the Afghans. There was, in the group of Afghans, there were maybe 6 people who spoke very, very good English and were extremely compelling and expressive. And it was just, there was such a language barrier. But the wonderful thing that we were able to do was to take down the information of the people that we met, who we were, of course, communicating with really just through our act of being there. And then one of our colleagues who focuses on China was able to follow up with them once they got to the US, and then tell that story with which Ruben just put in the chat.
This was Taiba and her son and many other Afghans waiting and walking in the jungle. This was almost the exit of the jungle for the Afghans when they were reaching the final point. And these were the canoes they had to travel with to the other places. This is one of the young Afghan women we followed the first night they arrived. It was complex. This was the first time she saw the sea. Her first experience at sea was traveling in a boat packed with people at night, with people shouting her in Spanish, things they didn't understood, all wet, very scared. And it was like really devastated moment. They praying at the exit of the jungle, and then we follow them to Mexico. And like there was more problems in Mexico because also there was paperwork they had to do. Even with like even being migrants, they gotta get some papers, some documents. So they were stuck in Mexico City for weeks trying to find that document from the Mexican authorities to be allowed to keep traveling north.
And I would actually add that, and I'm sure many of you have heard this, that many people say, like, you know, the trip to Central America, but then particularly in Mexico, is just as challenging and sometimes more challenging and scary than the trip through the jungle, right? The jungle is just like a representative chunk of this much larger journey. And in particular, and again, some of you are probably looking at this, but you know, we heard lots of cases of people being detained for weeks at a time in Mexico, lots of people being deported or being moved from, especially the Afghans, I think, because they sort of really stick out, and so they're really vulnerable. But lots of them, there was one family that we met that made it all the way to near the U.S. border, and then was basically thrown in a vehicle and trucked all the way back to Tapachula. And so that the Mexico journey was just, I think, really harrowing for a lot of people.
Yeah, she's Mosgan. She was one of the English fluent speakers. She was part of a big family traveling, like 5 brothers and 5 siblings and father and mother. It was really complex, really, really complex. And one of the challenges I faced, and I was talking about this just a moment ago, but one of the challenges I was facing, it was like all the family, there was this young woman was the one who speak the fluent English I was able to understand. It was really complex for me to communicate with the other members of the family, but at some point, her father started getting annoyed by her daughter talking to a reporter, even when he was there, and it's easy to understand how complex is this for a migrant. And they were asking me basic questions that I haven't asked myself, like, why are you doing this? Like, why are you crossing the jungle if you can just fly? Or why are you following our family into Mexico? So they were very suspicious. Yeah, it was not easy to understand. This was
Well, I would say Federico and I think we benefit, especially in this case, from being like a man-woman team, because, you know, especially when you're dealing with sort of like cultures from all over the world, and because there's sometimes things that we, as in that way, that it wasn't really necessarily appropriate for a man to be doing, but we had to learn that because neither of us have worked in Afghanistan, for example. And we're of course aware of it, but really how it works in practice, we had to really understand.
Yeah. This is Venezuelan and Haitians in Mexico trying to get the card to keep traveling north from Mexico City to the border. And these were, again, Ali and Taiba doing the bus journey from Mexico City to Tijuana. The bus journey usually takes 3 or 4 days without stops and without jumping out of the bus, with only one bathroom being used once and again and again and again from all migrants in the bus, without shower or food or anything at all. They kept traveling with their baby, and they made it to Tijuana. This is the border in Tijuana, the wall. This is the border patrol from the States, and this is how the border looks in Tijuana in the Pacific. There are 2 walls in that place. and the migrants, they don't cross them both. So at night, they climb one of the walls, and they just start walking inside, like between two walls. They had, like, the coyotes had these handmade ladders, and they climb the wall, get down in the other side, and they just sit down between the walls and wait for the border police to come, and they just give up. After that, we came back to Necoclí to understand the business of migration. If a tourist wants to go from Necoclí to Acandí, I know this is confusing town names, but if a tourist wants to cross the Gulf for tourism or local purposes, the boat ticket is $20. But if you're a migrant, it's not 20, it's 40. And the boat companies claim that migrants are not coming back. So they had to charge twice the money because their boats are coming back empty. And that's only how it starts. From there, it goes really deep. This is one of the guys selling goods and travel packages to migrants. This is how they arrived to Necoclí. So if you calculate that a bus can fit about 50 people inside, and there were days of 4,000 migrants crossing the jungle, it's easy to do the math and understand how many buses have to arrive to Necoclí every day to put that amount of people inside the jungle. But nobody is paying a lot of attention to that. So this is happening every day during all day on plain sight, and nobody seems to control something like that. This is William Agnes' son, one of their sons. It was a family, William, his wife, 3 boys and 1 daughter, and they were living here, next to this boat. They were setting their tent every day, working hard, begging in the streets, trying to collect money enough to make the journey. This is also another girl sleeping in this improvised hammock in the beach. This is a blanket tied to a palm tree. And the fathers and herself were selling like candies in the streets, trying to collect the money. Because to cross the Gulf, you need $40, but once you're in the other side, you need more money. This is a sticker they got, and the sticker is like the proof that they have already paid for security and they can go and cross the jungle. But the sticker has to be paid not to Colombian or Panamanian authorities, but to the groups that control the area.
Yeah, because I'll answer Warren's question really quickly in this picture. So in this question of like, is there any involvement by drug lords in crossing the Darien? So this part of northern Colombia is controlled by this very powerful armed group called the Clan del Golfo, or the AJC, the Autodefensas Gaitanistas de Colombia. And they're essentially a group that makes money off of lots of things, including narco trafficking, and sort of act, the Defensoria in the region, the ombudsman calls them the hegemonic armed actor. And what they essentially do in this region is that they set the rules, right? So this whole migration business exists because they allow it to exist. There's different disputes. The group will say that they're not really involved with migration. Other people will say like they are the business. And so there's some dispute about exactly how involved they are. But what we can say is they control the region. They set rules in the region. For example, they say people in the region, you cannot rob a migrant, you cannot sexually assault a migrant, you cannot kill a migrant, because we, the group, will come after you, right? They want to set good conditions for people to pass through. That they will admit that they do that. The other thing that we know that they do from our reporting is that they charge a tax to all of the migrants. It's something that is fairly new, which is a $70 or $80 tax, which is collected by people who call themselves like agentes or asesores or líneas. And that once the migrant pays this $80 tax, they get this sticker, which sometimes has the US flag on it. And they really can't continue into the jungle until they pay this tax and receive this sticker. So that is sort of the involvement of sort of narco trafficking groups, or really just one group, at least in this one part of the journey to the United States.
People organizing migration or profiting from migration is, of course, people that everybody knows in those towns. And these kind of bridges, roads, and many other like town improvements, they claim are being built by the money collected from migrants. And in a dock like this, dozens of boats arriving every day full of migrants. This is a meeting in town where the guy in the black cap and black t-shirt is telling the migrants, mostly Venezuelans, how much is the payment they need to do to be able to continue their journey through the jungle. This was a very young mother. She was 18 years old, and the babies were 2 years old and 9 months old. She was traveling alone with her 2 daughters, and she has nobody to help and no money. And these are bracelets given to migrants after they pay. Every color means a different thing. Every color means also a different payment. This was Samuel, a guy, a very young but brave guy we met. He was traveling with his mother and some relatives or something like that. And this is how migrants try to prepare herself with food for all the journey. It's so sophisticated. How do you say sophisticado? Sophisticated?
Sophisticated.
So sophisticated the situation that now, before entering the migrant camp in the Colombian side, that is not run by the state or any NGO, but some people, they search you, they don't allow knives or weapons, machetes, or anything like that.
And yeah, and I think just to this idea of like who's pulling all the strings, right? So you have this larger group in the region, the AJC, that sort of sets the rules and the boundaries and collects a tax, right? They're sort of acting like a government. And then you have local leaders. Some of them are who sort of run like community councils. Some of them are politicians who have organized this business, and they're the ones who hire through a foundation. They've set up a foundation, which they call Fundación Nueva Luz Darién, and they've set up this foundation where they hire this guy who has the guia shirt. They hire the guides. They say, okay, we're going to do security, etc. So those are the sort of like two institutions that are really running this.
And this is what I ask you to remember the first picture. Do you remember the first picture of Las Tecas in 2021? There was just a few tents. This is how it looks now. So 2 years, this evolves to solar panels, stores selling everything, and 2,000 to 3,000 migrants a day. And this is how it started. Every morning, thousands of migrants rushing to cross the rivers and walk up to the mountains to cross the Darien Gap. This is a picture of Samuel. For me, it's important because it shows like how bittersweet could be to be in a place like this. And this is a Venezuelan woman walking with her cat. She bring that cat from Venezuela and she carried the cat all along the Darien Gap. This guy was selling empanadas, pasteles. How do you say that, Julie? Help.
And it's empanadas, no, in all the languages.
Okay, this guy was selling empanadas. It was surprising for us because we were walking, sweating. This was really far, like several hours into the jungle. And suddenly, in a river, we take a turn, and there was this guy with empanadas saying, "Empanadas, empanadas, try them. If you don't like it, then you don't have to pay it." So, and he was making, well, quite a decent profit from that, you know. But at the same time, it's complicated because they are selling these goods to migrants who are basically dying from starving. This other guy was selling ice creams. So just imagine walking in the jungle, like really close to dehydration, absolutely exhausted, sweating, and there's a guy with this on his bag screaming, "Ice cream, ice cream, ice cream." It's like, it's a really, like, I don't know, like dystopian situation.
But I think it's really worth mentioning that, the minimum wage in Colombia is $250 a month. That guy told us that on a good day, he sells 200 ice creams for $1 each. And so he is essentially making a monthly minimum wage in a single day, right? And that's what's keeping this, this business going.
So these groups that control the region, that charge the migrants the money, they control all the route to the border between Colombia and Panama. This is a place called the Fourth Camp, and it's right into the border between Colombia and Panama. There are like stores, people sell food, really expensive, like a bottle of water is $5. And food is like $10 to $15. This family was also exhausted. Just imagine being a boy or a girl, like 10 to 13 years walking in this hell. They also rent these hammocks to sleep, $10 each for a night. And this was the last day. These people were preaching at 4 in the morning before starting the journey inside Panama. This is how a traffic jam of people looks like inside the Darien Gap, because the path is so thin that people can just flow fast from that. And this is the border. This is the people at the border between Colombia and Panama. It's easy in this picture to understand that to the right is Colombia, to the left is Panama. These migrants are into the very border of it. There's nothing but jungle behind them and in front of them, and they have to go and keep walking. This is an Ecuadorian woman, and daughter fell down from a man's shoulder. The man was trying to help her, and the daughter fell down and cut his eyebrow.
Yeah.
So the people charging money from the migrants are also hiring people like the guy in blue, who is a nurse, and they are putting these nurses along the way. So this girl,
just to speak to Sean's point, I mean, this idea that it seems like these non-governmental agencies are filling the gap. I mean, so this is a doctor who is hired by the Fundación Nueva Luz Darién, which is run by local leaders, which is making millions of dollars charging migrants to go through the jungle. But when they charge the migrant, the migrant is charged $170 for that bracelet that you saw, as well as the $80 tax to the Clan del Golfo or the AJC. But in that package, that $170, you get medical services. And so the local leaders under this foundation have hired this doctor to live in the jungle. I'm sorry, he's a nurse to live in the jungle and to help in these kinds of cases that, as you can see, could be life-threatening if this little girl has, 5 more days to hike through with her eye completely open up. And so there are no NGOs. The Red Cross is not inside the jungle. The Colombian government's not inside the jungle. The Panamanian government's barely inside the jungle. And so you have this group that is working alongside this larger armed group, at least at the very least, you could say in parallel, and providing these life-saving services.
Yeah. And we exit the jungle and we met Sarah again. Sarah is the young girl who was being lifted by a man in a mud. She and her mother were the ones who listened to Biden's suggestion for migrants that asked them to stop crossing illegally, apply for asylum in a legal way, find a sponsor in the States, and wait to get wait to be approved and travel like in a regular way. More than a year after, they're still waiting. This is Sarah and Alexandra, happily reunited, but waiting because they haven't been granted access to the States. Every day, every hour, Alexandra, the mother, looks on her cell phone to see if their application has been approved. And it's been more than 365 days, and she has been looking and looking and looking once and again and again and again. Both are becoming desperate. Both listen to Biden policies. Opposite to them, most of the migrants we followed and most of the migrants we stay in touch made it to the States. Now they have stable jobs. The kids are attending school. They are able to improve their lifestyle, and they are living what they were looking for. This is a picture from Venezuela. I think it's important to show where most of the migrants are coming from, and the collapse of the country was how the collapse of the country was fueling migration. And this is a short series I want to show you to finish all this long presentation. This is a set of 10 portraits of African migrants at the exit point of the jungle, showing what the most loved belonging to cross the jungle. This was a picture of her husband and her nephew back in Afghanistan. He was showing us the Quran. He was showing us a picture of his wife back in Afghanistan. I'm really sorry, I don't remember the name of this, but this like a necklace, but it's not just like a random necklace, like a regular one, but something they used to pray. She was a very smart woman, and this was a dictionary, like English Dari, if I'm not wrong. She learned several languages by herself. She crossed the jungle with her cell phone, and it was really important for her. This was a mother telling us that the most important thing for her was her daughter. This is a section of Quran, a bottle of water, and this guy chose a flower because he has no belongings left. This is Julie and me in the middle of the jungle, and I wanted to show you this photo because we took this photo, but we never use it in social media. We took this photo as a memory for us. But also, crossing the jungle and documenting migrants had become like a door for us to talk about ethics in journalism and about do's and don'ts. Of course, I made a lot of mistakes, but I learned and I keep learning about them. And these were our 1,000 stars hotel in the jungle to cross the Darien Gap. But thank you very much.
I know that we're super short on time. I just want to address one question, and that just sort of goes with the photos, is that I think it's really important to talk about the fact that right now what you're seeing is the Colombian side of the journey, which is really the first day and a half or so, or 2 days, depends how you talk about it, but is quite organized and really controlled by this armed group, and then of course this foundation. And so while there's still dangers and people have heart attacks and terrible things happen, it's somewhat organized. Once people cross over into Panama at this point, it's much, much, much more chaotic because it's the Panamanian government doesn't have the same kind of control over the route as the AJC, the armed group, has on the Colombian side. And there are indigenous communities that live on the Panamanian side in particular that are really involved with migration. And those communities have been very affected by this. The amount of migrants coming through has polluted the water. There's literally tons of trash in the jungle. You will also hear from people who've made this journey that most, if not all, at this point, at this sort of current juncture of the sort of assaults, robberies, kidnappings, etc., that are happening on the Panamanian side. And it's something that really hasn't been addressed yet by the Panamanian government in any real way. And right now, that is like the really sort of dangerous part. And it's also the part that we haven't, for example, documented in many months, and really like deserves a journalistic attention.
Okay, so I think we've come to the end of our sessions. It's really been an amazing presentation. Thank you so much to both of you. You've attracted an incredible audience. I'm sure the audience is also equally wowed. So I want to thank you for your great reporting. We are all looking forward to reading what you are next going to tell us about. And thank you again for spending this time with us. We really appreciate it.
Oops.
Thank you for inviting us. Thank you very much.
Great. And I just put my email in, I think. There we go. My email is julie@nytimes.com. So if any of you are want to share your work, studies, etc., interviews, I'm definitely really interested. So thanks.
Okay, so goodbye to everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank
Have
you.
great holidays, and looking forward to seeing you on one of our next sessions. Bye-bye, and thanks, Julie and Federico. Incredible.
Thank you. Bye.